Hello and welcome to today's daily devotion as we are introducing the book of First John. After some time in the Old Testament, especially with a great deal of law in the book of Hosea, I'd like to work through the three letters of the Apostle John today, starting with, of course, First John. And let's talk a little bit about this wonderful little book that we call First John. It's one of the shortest books of the New Testament, and yet it's also this wonderful, profound book of the Bible. It also is always more than it seems. John, and we're going to see this in a little bit, but John's writing style at first seems simple. You could even say simplistic. But he has these amazing simple phrases that have this majestic theology or scriptural truths behind them. And his insight has this wonderful depth into the majesty of God. And we're going to see his loving plan to rescue us from our sins. John was probably well along also in his years when he wrote this letter, so we see his love for his people that he has served. John's letter distills his God-given message and a lifetime of serving Christ as a shepherd of God's people. And he takes all of that and he winds it into this tightly written book of wisdom for all Christians of all time. And let's talk a little bit about the Apostle John. The actual book itself never actually identifies its author. The heading in our Bible, on your English Bible, when it says First John, that's simply something from the English Bible editors. But from the earliest history of the Christian church, there's never been any serious doubt about who wrote this book. It's always been accepted that the Apostle John wrote this book. He uses, one of the reasons we can say that is, he uses the same striking term for Jesus as he does in his gospel. He is the Word. And he uses similar terminology as he does in Revelation as well, to describe Jesus as God's supreme self-revelation. Now, John himself, let's take a look at him. John's name in its original Hebrew is Yochanan, which means literally the Lord is gracious. Now, there are 10 other Johns in the Old Testament that are listed. There are 5 listed in the New Testament. The spelling in Greek comes from Ioannis, and its Latin form often has a J instead of an I, which the original Greek had, and that's where we get the name Ioannis, and turns into the German Johannes, French Jean, Spanish Juan. All of these are roots from, are taken from the root of John. Now, we know John as the son of Zebedee, and Salome was his mother, who was actually possibly the sister of Mary, the mother of Jesus. So, depending on how you understand one reference in John 19, it's actually possible that the Apostle John was actually the first cousin of Jesus. And that would also actually, if this were true, would actually help explain why John was so close personally to Jesus. After all, in his gospel, he never uses his name. He refers to himself as the disciple whom Jesus loved. Both him and his brother James had forceful personalities. In fact, Jesus nicknamed them the Thunder Boys. We call them the Sons of Thunder. They were originally fishermen in Galilee by trade, and it's possible that John is the unnamed disciple of John the Baptist, who, along with Andrew, were the first disciples to be called by Jesus. John was given his first, apparently temporary call as a disciple of Jesus in Judea, along with Philip, Nathanael, Peter, and Andrew. Jesus first calls them, and they follow him for a time, but then they actually go back home and go back to their lives until, again in Galilee, Jesus now permanently calls them to make them fishers of men. John is chosen by Jesus to be one of those three inner circle disciples, you could call them, along with Peter and James, that they got special teaching from Jesus. They got to see certain things that even the other disciples didn't get to see. Peter, James, and John got to see Jesus raise Jairus' daughter back to life. They got to see the transfiguration. They were with Jesus as he prayed in the Garden of Gethsemane. Unfortunately, though, you can also see John is a sinful human being like you and me, and some of that special attention went to his head at times, and James and John had secretly come to Jesus asking for special treatment in his kingdom. Went to his head. John was very aware of the special relationship he had with Jesus, as I said earlier. Never refers to himself by name in his gospel, just calls himself the disciple that Jesus loved. He appears to be, at least he's the only disciple that's named at the cross as Jesus died. The early chapters of the book of Acts portray John as one of the leaders among the apostles and in the church in Jerusalem. So obviously, we very much thank the Lord for what he did for the church through the apostle John, and a wonderful role model for us in our Christian life. And also a role model in the sense of learning what not to do from his mistakes as well. We don't know when John wrote his books of the Bible, specifically 1st and 2nd and 3rd John. It seems to be most logical to think that these come at the end of John's ministry. In both 2nd and 3rd John, he refers to himself as the elder. And in 1st John, we'll see him refer to his readers as children 9 times. Probably wouldn't come off very well if he is a young pastor calling his members children. But from this older, venerated pastor who has served for many, many years, that actually sounds sweet and enduring. Also, in the book of Revelation, John reveals that he is in exile on the island of Patmos, probably during the reign of Emperor Domitian. Many of the apostles were executed for their faith, and John, he's exiled when he writes the book of Revelation. Quite possibly other books that he wrote as well were from this island of Patmos that he was exiled to just for preaching about Jesus. John's 5 New Testament books are very likely also the last books of the Bible to have been written because, again, he just lived longer than the other apostles. Also, John quite likely served as a pastor in the city of Ephesus in Asia Minor, modern-day Turkey. An early church leader, Irenaeus, says that he was the pastor in Ephesus, supervising a large congregation there, and also traveling around Asia Minor, serving those people as well. And that helps give us an idea of maybe who the recipients of this book are. He never identifies the readers in the book itself. He does, however, appear to be quite familiar with them. After all, he calls them dear children. So if he had been the pastor in Ephesus, it would be quite logical that Ephesus would have been on the coast in southern Asia. You have there the province on the western side of Turkey. That these would have been the people that this book was written to Ephesus, to the surrounding churches, just like there were 7 churches in this area that the book of Revelation had addressed to. Well, that would make sense for this letter as well. And why did John write this letter? Well, Satan's assaults on the church, on God's word, on Christ himself, well, they never stop. And already in the first century, there were false teachings popping up. And many of these false teachings tried to undermine the teaching of the apostles. In fact, one of the early false teaching movements, which I believe we've addressed it in a different book, is what's called Gnosticism. It's this idea that there can be some sort of special spiritual knowledge, some sort of secret knowledge that the Bible did not have. And just give you some examples of what Gnostic teachers asserted from actually our People's Bible. Our People's Bible series is this wonderful Bible commentary series through books of the Bible. I oftentimes read through it myself. I oftentimes read through it before I work on a devotion myself. So here are some of the teachings of Gnosticism from the People's Bible. Gnosticism taught that there was no incarnation or virgin birth, no atoning death or a bodily resurrection. So there goes our hope as Christians. It taught that the heavenly Christ and the earthly Jesus were 2 separate things, that Jesus isn't God, actually God himself. It taught that all matter was evil and only mind and spirit were pure. Thus, since human bodies are basically evil anyway and just temporary tents for the soul, it didn't matter how you lived. So, in other words, you could do whatever you want to your body. It taught that the spiritually advanced Gnostic leaders were no longer sinful, and that the Bible was insufficient as a source of information, and that the apostles had no special authority for telling people how to think and live. John's letter is a powerful blast of truth. It's a rebuke, a powerful encouragement and showing of love to combat this false teaching. He says, since God is light and God is love, real Christians are always going to combine right thinking with right living, which Gnosticism didn't really care about. And what's the style of this? John has such an interesting style, so different than the rest of the New Testament, especially different from Paul. Here you'll see we'll have no quotations from the Old Testament. It doesn't list a bunch of names. There's no greetings or personal instructions. John's style, he writes very short sentences. His vocabulary is very limited. The Apostle Paul wrote very linear. He takes up one subject, he writes on it, and then he moves on. Well, John's very different. He writes in a circular fashion. He jumps from one concept to another, linking them together, and then eventually he comes back one or more times to the original thought. One way of describing it I've read is his style is described as a spiral staircase, where you're going around and around in circles, but you're always going upward. He likes repetition and parallelism of thought. He prefers stating abstract principles over concrete examples. He uses metaphors like book and light and darkness, truth and love. He even doesn't shy away from paradoxes, stating one thing and then seeming to assert the opposite. In fact, he sounds a lot, well, like his teacher, his master Jesus, who spoke in such interesting and ways that got you to really chew on what he was saying, to understand what he was saying. Quite frankly, First John is really hard. It's almost impossible to outline, at least outline neatly. There's considerable overlapping of ideas. So here's one attempt at an outline that I've seen written. A theme of that you may have fellowship, and after an introduction, there's three cycles that Christians walk in the light, Christians know different things, and then Christians love, and they show their love. And then he concludes just by simply reviewing the themes that he's touched on. I'm very excited to work through this book. It might be a short book, but it is a wonderful book that takes a careful reading as he connects all of these themes and he circles around, but a wonderful book to see the love of God for us. I look forward to reading it with you next time. Thank you for joining me. God bless your day, and I'll see you next time.